Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. Today we are going to talk about cognitive science approach to education. The objectives of today's lessons are to understand the term cognitive science, to be familiar with the interdisciplinary nature of cognitive science, to know the historical background, and to learn about the current developments in this field. Probably nothing in the universe is more mysterious than the workings of human mind. The attempt to understand consciousness stems from the ancient Greek saying, "Know thyself." This simple statement has vast implication on how we understand not only ourselves but also people around us. The field of cognitive science has emerged in the last few decades as a major discipline that promises to be increasingly important in the 21st century. Dramatic advances in brain imaging and other research technologies are moving cognitive scientists towards an unprecedented view of our brains and its functions. The focus of cognitive science is on achieving scientific understanding of how human cognition works. Let's begin this session by discussing the term cognitive science. In order to understand cognitive science, let's first see what we mean by the word cognitive. The word cognitive is related to the word cognition, which refers to the mental action or the process of acquiring knowledge. In other words, it is the accumulation of information we have acquired through learning, experience, or our senses. Cognition includes different cognitive processes like learning, attention, memory, reasoning, problem solving, decision making, etc., which form part of our intellectual development. These processes operate at every waking moment, and they are part of our personality, our intelligence, and the way we interact socially. Next, we will talk about cognitive process. So, what is cognitive process? Cognitive process is the process we use to incorporate new knowledge and make decisions based on this new knowledge. Different cognitive functions like perception, attention, memory, and reasoning have roles in these processes. These cognitive functions work together to assimilate new knowledge and help us to interpret the world around us. We will discuss each function briefly. First, perception as a cognitive process. Cognitive perception allows us to organize and understand the world through stimuli that we receive from our senses like sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. Once the stimulus is received, our brain integrates all the information and creates new memory. The second one is attention. Attention allows us to concentrate on the activity in order to process it more thoroughly. Attention is the fundamental cognitive function which is used in the majority of the tasks that we do daily. The next aspect is memory. Memory allows us to store and recover information from the past. We have short-term memory, which is the ability to retain information for a short period of time. For example, we remember a mobile number as long as we don't write it down. And long-term memory, which is all the memories that we keep for a long period for later retrieval. Next is thought as cognitive process. Thought is the fundamental for all cognitive processes. It allows us to integrate all the information that we have received, and to do this, it uses reasoning, synthesis, and problem solving. Then we have language, which helps us to express our thoughts and feelings through spoken words. The next aspect is learning. We use learning to incorporate new information into our prior knowledge. We can see here the processes that are happening inside the mind. So in short, cognition can be defined as the process of acquiring knowledge or information through experience, learning or senses. Now that we have understood the meaning of the terms cognition and cognitive, let's go to the next aspect, which is cognitive science. Would any one of you like to guess the meaning of cognitive science?
Is it studying the activities of the mind scientifically?
Yes, you're right. Cognitive science is the study of the human mind and how mind represents and manipulates or uses knowledge, and how the mental processes are realized in the brain. Cognitive scientists view the mind as an information processor, which is similar to a computer. Cognitive science is often said to be influenced by the rise of computer. Think for a minute about a personal computer. It performs a variety of functions. Information gets into the computer via input devices such as keyboard or a mouse, and it is stored in the computer. This information can be later processed through various software available. We can get the result or the output on the monitor or through a printer. Similarly, we may think of people performing various tasks similar to the way computer processes information. Information is input that is passed on to our minds through perception, what we see and hear. It is stored in our memories and processed in the form of thought. Our thoughts can then serve as output, such as language or physical behavior. Therefore, cognitive science examines what cognition is, its function and its mechanism. The next aspect about cognitive science is its interdisciplinary nature. Interdisciplinary means combining or involving two or more academic disciplines or fields of study. If you all remember, we have already discussed that cognition involves the mental processes of knowing and understanding. Cognitive science is interdisciplinary because these mental processes are analyzed from different perspectives, disciplines and contexts. Now let's look at the disciplines or areas of study that built cognitive science. The major disciplines that built cognitive science are the fields of philosophy, psychology, linguistics, computer science, neuroscience, and anthropology or social science. Therefore, we can claim that cognitive science is an interdisciplinary scientific study of the mind and its processes. As a result of the collective effort among these disciplines, there has been and will continue to have huge advancements in our understanding of the human mind and its processes. Now that we have defined the term cognitive science and its interdisciplinary nature, let's review the term cognitive science once more. So far, we have learnt that cognitive science is the study of the human mind and brain, focusing on how the mind represents knowledge and what it does with knowledge, and also how mental representations and processes are realized in the brain. In addition to this, we have also discussed that cognitive science is interdisciplinary in its approach because it studies the mind and its processes from several fields like philosophy, psychology, linguistics, computer science, neuroscience, and social science. The origin of cognitive science dates back to the age of some of the great philosophers of the world like René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, David Hume, and John Locke. Now, we will have a look at these philosophers who laid the foundation of cognitive science. René Descartes. René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and a scientist. One of the deepest and most lasting legacies of Descartes' philosophy is his thesis that mind and body are distinct entities, a thesis which is now called mind-body dualism. He claims that the nature of mind is completely different from that of the body, and therefore it is possible for one to exist without the other. on first philosophy and the description of human body are some of his masterpieces. His argument gives rise to the famous problem of mind-body dualism, which is still debated today. Some of Descartes' great works include Rules of the Direction of Mind, Discourse of the Method, and Meditations. Second is David Hume. David Hume was a Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and an essayist. A treatise of human nature, an inquiry concerning human understanding, dialogues concerning natural religion are some of his masterpieces. Taking the scientific model of Isaac Newton as his model, Hume tried to describe how the mind works in acquiring knowledge and claimed that there can be no knowledge of anything beyond experience. Next, Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant is a German philosopher. His masterworks are Critiques of Pure Reason and Critique of Practical Reason. According to Kant's theory, the rightness or wrongness of actions does not depend on their consequences, but on whether they fulfill our duty or not. Next is John Locke. John Locke is one of the most influential political philosophers of the modern period. He is commonly known as the father of liberalism. For Locke, all knowledge comes exclusively through experience. He argued that at birth the mind is a tabula rasa or a blank slate. Humans fill the blank slate with ideas as they experience the world through their five senses. Some of his masterpieces are Two Treatises of Government, an essay concerning human understanding, and Some Thoughts Concerning Education. The studies done by these early philosophers contributed significantly to the philosophical discovery of the mind and ultimately led to the development of psychology as a major area of study. Next is the modern era. We will now move forward to the modern period of cognitive science. Issues like dissatisfaction with behaviorism and advancement of mathematics triggered an environment that was favorable for the emergence of a discipline that could explore aspects like memory, observation, learning, and information processing. Behaviorism primarily focused on activities or performance that could be observed externally. It did not take into account the activities that happen inside the mind when some work is being done. It ignores the role of thoughts and emotions. It takes no account of what happens inside the mind. Thus, there was a shift of focus from external observable behavior to internal mental processes.
Can you briefly explain behaviorism?
Sure. Behaviorism is primarily associated with Pavlov's classical conditioning and Skinner's operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishment for a particular behavior. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between behavior and consequence for that behavior. For example, in a laboratory, when a rat presses a blue button, it receives food. But when it presses the red button, it receives a mild electric shock. As a result, he learns to press the blue button and avoid the red button. In contrast, classical conditioning happens when a stimulus automatically triggers an involuntary response. In this learning process, a biologically potent stimulus, for example food, is paired with a previously neutral stimulus like a bell. Behaviorists studied the behavior of animals and noticed that behavior which is immediately rewarded becomes more likely to be repeated in the near future, whereas when something undesirable is received, the same behavior is unlikely to be repeated. These processes are called reinforcement and punishment. Generally, behaviorist experimentation is undertaken with animals and generalized to humans. Some critics see this as limiting its capacity to address complex behavior. Many also argue that behaviorism is one-dimensional approach to understanding human behavior and it does not account for free will and internal influences such as mood, thoughts and feelings. Hence, there was a shift from behaviorism to cognitivism. So now that we have briefly talked about behaviorism, let's get back to our discussion on the modern era of cognitive science. The modern period of cognitive science can be traced back to the early 1930s and 1940s, when a brilliant group of interdisciplinary thinkers began to apply ideas from the theory of computation to the scientific explanation of human thought. Researchers such as Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts attempted to understand the organizing principles of the mind. They developed the first model of artificial neural networks based on the structure of biological neural networks. Apart from them, pioneers in the early development of digital computer in the 1940s and 1950s, Alan Turing and John Newman play a central role in advancement of cognitive science. And also psychologists George Miller, Steven Pinker, linguist Noam Chomsky developed alternatives to behaviorist theories in their fields.
Is there any Indian who is famous in the field of cognitive science?
Yes. Currently, we have an Indian, Professor V.S. Ramchandran, as a renowned figure in the field of cognitive science. Professor Ramchandran is a neuroscientist known primarily for his work in the fields of behavioral neurology and visual psychophysics. He is the director of the Center for Brain and Cognition and distinguished professor with the Psychology Department and Neurosciences program at the University of California, San Diego. He is also the author of several books like Phantoms in the Brain, A Brief Tour of Human Consciousness, The Telltale Brain. He is also called the Marco Polo of neuroscience. His many contributions include groundbreaking work in human vision, mirror visual feedback, synesthesia, language and metaphors, autism, and rare neurological disorders. Next, we are going to learn about the centers of cognitive science. The term cognitive science was introduced by Christopher Higgins in 1973. In the same decade, the journal Cognitive Science and the Cognitive Science Society were founded. And this resulted in cognitive science becoming an internationally visible area of research. Since then, more than 90 universities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia have introduced cognitive science programs and courses in this field. By the late 20th century, cognitive science had become a flourishing academic field with hundreds of departments throughout the world and numerous international societies, journals, and conferences. In India as well, we have departments in universities, centers, and institutions where courses are offered and research is conducted in the field of cognitive science. Some of the notable centers and courses offered in the field of cognitive science in India are IIT Gandhinagar, University of Hyderabad Center for Neural and Cognitive Sciences, National Brain Research Center, School of Cognitive Science, Jadavpur University, Center of Behavioralism and Cognitive Sciences, University of Allahabad, National Institute of Advanced Studies, IIIT Hyderabad, Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education, Center for Converging Technologies, University of Rajasthan. Next, we will discuss the current developments in the field of cognitive science. Research in cognitive science with focus on education and with the aim of developing improved teaching methods gives a holistic view of how infants and young children develop linguistic system. That is, how they learn sounds, grammar, words, and meanings in a language. What we need to understand here is the difference between learning and acquiring. You all might have come across the term second language acquisition or SLA.
I would like to know the difference between acquisition and learning.
All right, let's briefly discuss what we mean by acquisition and learning. there is an important distinction made between language learning and language acquisition. Children acquire language through a subconscious process during which they are unaware of grammatical rules of the language. This is similar to the way they acquire their first language. They develop a feel for what is correct and what is not correct. In order to acquire language, learner needs a source of natural communication. With acquisition, you are not consciously aware of the learning process. Learning, on the other hand, is a conscious activity. It's what you do when we find a word in the dictionary. It's also what happens when we consciously study vocabulary or grammar rules. Therefore, it involves active learning of grammar rules. Here, direct instructions about the rules of the language are given. Let's have a quick glance at the difference between acquisition and learning. Language acquisition, as you can see, is a subconscious process without formal instruction, and you get massive exposure. On the other hand, language learning is a conscious process. It requires formal instruction and it has limited exposure to language. Now that we have learned the two terms acquisition and learning, let's get back to our previous discussion, which was on current development in cognitive science. So what was the last thing we discussed under current development?
We discussed that research in cognitive science helps in education.
Anyone else would like to answer?
It also helps us to understand how children learn languages.
All right. Anybody else?
And it also aims at developing effective teaching methods.
All right. So we will take it forward from there. Explorations in cognitive science have revolutionized research in various fields such as nature and origin of mental disorders, design of better teaching and learning tools, reforming social policies, and developing improved software technologies and artificial intelligence devices. Can anybody explain what we mean by artificial intelligence?
It is developing computer system which is able to perform tasks requiring human intelligence.
Anybody else would like to answer?
It can do activities like recognizing voice.
And
also making decision and language translation.
excellent. Artificial intelligence is essential to understand cognition. It is a branch of computer science which focuses on how humans store information with respect to language, reasoning, memory, and understanding. So we have seen that cognitive science has provided invaluable guiding practice in many applied domains or areas, including education, pedagogy, engineering, legal, and medical fields. Contribution of cognitive science also lies extensively in education. This approach attempts to explain how students make decisions, why they make certain errors, and how they remember and forget while learning something. It also addresses the underlying thought process and aims at cultivating it in learners to empower them with kinds of knowledge required and approach to be adopted for excellence in academic field. Since cognitive science draws on the methods of various disciplines, it offers a broad approach to education and makes it richer. We will talk about the contribution of cognitive science in education at length in the next session. Now that we have reached the end of our session, let's have a quick recap of what we discussed today. If you remember, we began our discussion by explaining the terms cognition and cognitive process. We defined cognitive process as a process of acquiring knowledge or information through experience, learning, and senses. Then we moved on to the concept, what is meant by the term cognitive science. Next, we looked at the historical background of cognitive science and its current development, how the idea was conceptualized by earlier philosophers, and what developments have been made by the modern thinkers so far. Lastly, we talked about the contribution of cognitive science in education. With this, we have reached the end of today's session. Thank you for your participation.